In 1877, Colorado, Caleb Turner held his newborn son against his chest as the child's breath grew weaker with each passing hour. 3 days without milk. 3 days of watching his only piece of his dead wife slip away. The town had already buried his wife. Now they were content to bury his son, too. But on the coldest night of winter, when all hope seemed lost, a grieving stranger opened her door. What happened next would defy everything the town believed about family, love, and redemption. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The church bells of Grafton, Colorado struck midnight. Their iron song cut through wind that carried snow like thrown stones. Caleb Turner did not hear them. He was past hearing much of anything except the terrible silence coming from the bundle pressed against his chest. A silence that terrified him more than any scream could. His son was dying. 3 days. That is how long it had been since Mary died, bringing this child into the world. 3 days since Caleb had become both father and widower in the same blood-soaked hour. 3 days of watching his infant son grow weaker, his cries becoming whispers, his whispers becoming nothing at all. The baby would not take cow milk, would not take sugar water, would not take goat milk that Caleb had ridden 6 miles to acquire. Everything came back up. With each failed attempt, the child's strength drained away like water through cupped hands. Now the baby lay still and quiet, in a way that made Caleb's heart hammer against his ribs with pure animal fear. He had tried everything. He had begged everyone. The town midwife, Mrs. Henderson, had turned him away that morning. She said she was 63 years old. Her body stopped making milk before Caleb was born. She told him to try the Morrison woman on 5th Street. The Morrison woman had 8 children hanging from her skirts and another swelling her belly. She looked at Caleb with something between pity and contempt. She barely had enough for her own. She could not be wet nurse to every motherless child in the territory. He went to the doctor's wife next, then to every woman of childbearing age he could think of. Some were polite in their refusals. Others were not. By noon, word had spread through Grafton's 2 main streets and 3 saloons. Caleb Turner was going door to door begging for breast milk like some kind of desperate animal. The laughter started around supper time. Caleb had overheard through the thin walls of the general store. Men talking about how Turner was asking women to nurse his whelp. What kind of man puts that on a woman? The kind who should have kept his wife alive if he wanted a living son. That voice belonged to Dutch Matthews, a cattle buyer who had courted Mary before Caleb came to town. The man had never forgiven her for choosing a dirt-poor rancher over a man with money and prospects. Caleb had almost burst through that door, almost shattered Dutch Matthews' jaw with his fist. But the baby had stirred weakly against his chest, reminding him that he had no time for pride or vengeance. His son was dying. Nothing else mattered. So he swallowed his rage and kept walking, kept begging, kept searching for someone. Anyone who might show mercy to a child who had done nothing wrong except be born. The afternoon brought sleet that turned the streets to rivers of frozen mud. Caleb trudged through it all, his boots soaked through, his coat offering little protection against the cold. The baby was wrapped in every blanket he owned. But Caleb could feel how the child's body temperature had dropped, how his small limbs hung limp instead of curling tight the way healthy infants did. By evening, even the polite refusals had dried up. Women saw him coming and turned away. Men blocked doorways with their bodies. One rancher's wife had actually spit at his feet. Her husband said if Caleb came back, he would set the dogs on him. Caleb had wanted to shout that his wife had been decent folk, that Mary had sung in the church choir and baked bread for sick neighbors. Never said an unkind word about anyone. He wanted to tell them that this baby was decent folk too. More decent than any of them, because he had not yet learned to be cruel. But his throat was too tight for words. The baby was too quiet. The sun was setting on the 3rd day. That is when Caleb understood the truth. The town was not going to help. They were going to let his son die. Then they would cluck their tongues at the funeral and say what a shame it all was. Life would go on for everyone except Caleb Turner and his nameless boy, because the baby still had no name. Mary had died before she could speak it. Caleb could not bring himself to name a child he might have to bury. It felt like a curse, like saying the words would make death inevitable. The wind picked up as darkness fell. Caleb found himself on the steps of Grafton Methodist Church without quite remembering how he got there. His legs had simply carried him to the last place he could think to go. The church was locked. Sunday services were 2 days away. Reverend Michaels lived 3 miles outside town on a homestead with his grown children. Caleb sank onto the top step, his back against the heavy wooden doors. The baby lay against his chest, barely moving, barely breathing. For the first time since Mary's death, Caleb allowed himself to cry. Not the angry tears he had shed over her grave, but helpless broken sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief. "I am sorry," he whispered to the child. "I am so sorry. I tried. God knows I tried." The baby's eyes were closed. His mouth hung slightly open. His skin had taken on a waxy pallor that Caleb had seen before on corpses laid out for burial. 3 days without proper nourishment had reduced the child to something barely alive, a collection of bones and skin and fading breath. Caleb thought about Mary, how she had glowed during those last months of pregnancy, her hands always resting on her swollen belly, her face radiant with joy. "He is kicking," she would say, pulling Caleb's hand to feel. "He is strong. He is going to be just like his father." But Caleb was not strong. If he was strong, he would have saved Mary. If he was strong, he would have found milk for his son. If he was strong, he would not be sitting here on frozen church steps holding a dying baby and admitting defeat. A voice cut through his spiral of despair. "Mr. Turner, is that you?" Caleb looked up, squinting against the snow. A figure approached through the darkness. A woman, her shawl pulled tight against the cold, carrying a lantern that swung with each step. "Mr. Turner, is that you?" He recognized the voice now. Margaret Flynn, the postmaster's daughter. She was maybe 22 or 23 years old, unmarried, lived with her father above the post office. Caleb had spoken to her maybe twice in the year he had lived in Grafton. "Miss Flynn." His voice came out rough, broken by cold and crying. She climbed the steps and held the lantern higher, casting light across his face. Her expression shifted from curiosity to alarm. "Lord have mercy, you are half frozen. And the baby." She moved closer, peering at the bundle in his arms. "Oh no. Oh, Mr. Turner. He is dying." The words came out flat, factual. Caleb was beyond pretense. "I have tried everything, asked everyone. Nobody will help." Margaret's jaw tightened. "I heard about that. Heard people laughing about it, too." She paused, seeming to struggle with something. "I am not. I cannot help you the way you need. I do not have what the baby requires, but there is someone who might." Hope flickered in Caleb's chest. A painful thing, sharp as broken glass. "Who?" "Elena Moore. She lives in the old Dawson house on the east edge of town. Lost her own baby a couple months back. Her husband left right after." Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "I deliver her mail sometimes. I have seen her. Well, I have seen evidence that she might still be able to help, if you understand my meaning." Caleb understood. His face flushed despite the cold. Under normal circumstances, he would never approach a woman about such a private matter. But these were not normal circumstances. Desperation had burned away his capacity for embarrassment. "Will she help?" he asked. "I do not know. She does not leave the house much, does not talk to people. But she is not cruel like some folks in this town. And she knows what it is like to lose a child." Margaret hesitated. "There is something else you should know. People in town do not speak kindly about her. There are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "The unfair kind. The kind people tell about women who do not have husbands to protect their reputations." Margaret's voice turned sharp. None of it is true as far as I can tell, but you should know what you are walking into. Caleb looked down at his son. The baby's chest was barely moving. Time was running out, if it had not run out already. Where did you say the house was? East on Main Street, past the livery. Look for the only house with a blue door. Margaret touched his arm briefly. I hope she helps you, Mr. Turner. I truly do, and I am sorry about Mary. She was a good woman. Caleb could only nod. If he tried to speak about Mary, he would break apart completely. He descended the church steps and turned east, following Margaret's directions. The wind had picked up, driving snow horizontally down the street. Caleb bent over the baby, trying to shield him from the worst of it. The streets of Grafton were nearly empty. Most sensible people had retreated indoors hours ago. Yellow lamplight glowed in windows as Caleb passed, offering glimpses of families sitting down to supper, children playing on floors, couples talking over coffee. Normal life, the life he thought he would have with Mary. Please, he thought, please let this woman help. Please let my son live. And there, through the driving snow, Caleb saw it, a small house set back from the road. Even in the darkness and storm, the door's blue paint was unmistakable. He stopped at the gate, suddenly aware of what he was about to do. But the baby in his arms had gone completely still. Caleb pushed through the gate and stumbled up the path to the door. Caleb's hands were so cold he could barely form a fist to knock. When he finally managed it, the sound seemed to echo in the storm-muffled silence. No response. He knocked again. Harder. Please, he called out. Please, I need help. My baby is dying. Still nothing. Caleb leaned his forehead against the door, fighting back panic. Maybe Margaret had been wrong. Maybe Elena Moore had left town. Maybe she was inside but refusing to answer. Maybe. The door opened so suddenly that Caleb nearly fell through it. A woman stood in the doorway, lamplight spilling around her silhouette. She was younger than he had expected, maybe 30 at most, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that held a kind of exhausted weariness. What do you want? Her voice was flat, emotionless. My baby. Caleb held out the bundle with shaking hands. He is starving. Will not take cow milk or anything else. I heard. Margaret Flynn said you might. That you could possibly. He could not finish. The words tangled in his throat. Elena Moore's expression did not change. She looked at the baby, then at Caleb, then back at the baby. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, come inside, you are letting in the cold. She stepped back and Caleb entered a small, neat parlor. The house was warm, blessedly warm. Heated by a stove that glowed in the corner. Simple furniture, clean floors. Everything organized and tidy in a way that spoke of someone trying to maintain control over a life that had spiraled into chaos. Elena closed the door and turned to face him. In the better light, Caleb could see the shadows under her eyes, the tightness around her mouth. This was a woman who had not slept properly in weeks. A woman who had survived something that should have broken her. Let me see him, she said quietly. Caleb unwrapped the blankets with fumbling fingers. The baby lay exposed, his tiny chest barely rising, his skin that terrible waxy color. Elena drew in a sharp breath. How long since he fed? 3 days since my wife died giving birth to him. Elena's eyes met his then, and Caleb saw something flicker in their depths. Recognition, understanding, the terrible knowledge of what it meant to lose everything. Put him on the table, she said, gesturing to a small dining table. Gently, Caleb obeyed, laying his son down on the smooth wood surface. Elena moved closer, her hands hovering over the baby without quite touching him. She was trembling, Caleb realized. Her whole body shook with some internal struggle. I lost my son 2 months ago, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 11 weeks old. Went to sleep one night and did not wake up. She paused. My husband could not bear to stay in this house afterward, could not bear to look at me. Said I must have done something wrong, must have smothered the baby in my sleep, or missed some sign of sickness. I am sorry. The words were inadequate, but Caleb meant them. My body still makes milk. Elena's hands clenched into fists. Every day. A reminder of what I lost. I have tried everything to make it stop, but it will not. She looked at Caleb with eyes that held both pain and something like defiance. People in town think I am cursed or crazy. They cross the street to avoid me. I do not think you are cursed, Caleb said. You do not know me. I know you opened your door. Elena's expression cracked slightly. She reached out and touched the baby's hand, just one finger against his tiny palm. The baby's fingers twitched, a reflexive movement that made Caleb's heart leap with hope. If I do this, Elena said slowly, the town will call me worse things than they already do. They will say it is indecent, unnatural. They will say I am trying to replace my dead son with yours. I do not care what they say. You should. Because they will say things about you too. They will question your intentions, your morals. They will make your life hell. Caleb looked at his dying son. My life is already hell. Let them talk. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the baby with careful, experienced hands, the kind of hands that had held an infant before, that knew how to support a fragile head, how to cradle a small body. What is his name? She asked. He does not have one yet. Her eyebrows rose. 3 days old and no name, I could not. Caleb's voice broke. I could not name him if he was going to die? Elena's expression softened slightly. She looked down at the baby in her arms, this nameless child hovering between life and death. Then we had better make sure he lives. She moved to a rocking chair by the stove and sat down. Her hands were steady now, no longer trembling. She adjusted the baby's position. You can stay, Elena said quietly. He is your son. You have the right to watch. But Caleb could not. It felt too intimate, too sacred. So he stood with his back turned, listening to the rustle of fabric, the creak of the rocking chair, and then silence. Terrible, stretching silence. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. Had he been too late? Had the baby already slipped away? He started to turn, unable to bear not knowing. And then he heard it, a small sound, wet and rhythmic. The sound of a baby nursing. His son was drinking. His son was feeding. His son was alive. Caleb's legs gave out. He sank to the floor right there, his back against the wall, his face in his hands. The tears came again, but different this time. Not the helpless sobs of the church steps, but something deeper and more overwhelming. Relief, gratitude, joy so intense it hurt. Behind him, Elena spoke softly. That is it. That is good. You are doing so well. Caleb did not know if she was talking to the baby or to herself. Time passed. The storm outside intensified. Wind howled around the eaves. Snow piled against the windows. Inside, the stove's warmth filled the room. The only sound was the gentle creak of the rocking chair and the quiet, steady rhythm of an infant feeding. Eventually, Elena spoke. He is asleep. Caleb turned. Elena was still in the rocking chair, holding his son against her chest. The baby's face was relaxed, peaceful in a way Caleb had not seen since birth. His color had already improved, no longer that terrible waxy pallor, but something closer to the pink flush of health. He took quite a lot. Elena continued. He was desperately hungry, but he kept it down. That is the important thing. Caleb approached slowly, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. His son, alive, sleeping, saved. I do not know how to thank you, he managed. You do not need to thank me. Elena looked down at the baby with an expression Caleb could not quite read. He needed help. I could provide it. That is all. But it was not all. And they both knew it. What had happened in this room went beyond simple charity. It was something more profound, more complicated. Two people devastated by loss, connected by a child who refused to die. He will need to feed again, Elena said, probably in a few hours. Newborns eat frequently. Caleb's relief turned to uncertainty. I cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am offering. Elena's voice was firm. This baby needs consistent nourishment. Not sporadic feedings whenever you can find someone to help. For the next few weeks at least, he needs to eat every few hours, day and night. I will pay you, Caleb said quickly. I do not have much, but I have a small ranch outside town. Cattle, chickens. I can bring you eggs, milk, meat. I do not want payment. Then what do you want? Elena looked at him directly. I want to keep this baby alive. That is all I want. There was something in her voice, a fierce determination that Caleb recognized because he felt it too. The desperate need to save this one small life when they had both failed to save the ones they loved most. All right, Caleb said. Then we will keep him alive together. Elena nodded once, brisk and businesslike, as if they had just concluded a practical arrangement rather than something that would change both their lives forever. She stood carefully, supporting the baby's head, and handed him back to Caleb. You should rewrap him warmly. The storm is getting worse. You will need to protect him on the walk back. Back. Caleb looked toward the window where snow was now falling so thick he could barely see the fence line. I cannot take him back out in this. Where are you staying? Old boarding house on 3rd Street, Mrs. Carmichael's place. Elena frowned. That is half a mile at least. And the baby needs to stay warm, needs to feed again in a few hours. She hesitated, clearly struggling with propriety. You could stay here, just for tonight. There is a spare room. It is small, but it has a bed and it is warm. Caleb knew he should refuse. A widower staying overnight in the home of an unmarried woman. The scandal would spread through Grafton like wildfire. But the baby was finally sleeping peacefully, his belly full, his body warm. The thought of taking him back out into the storm felt like tempting death all over again. Are you sure? He asked. I am sure. Elena's expression was resolute. Let people talk. They are going to talk anyway. She showed him to a small room off the kitchen. It contained a narrow bed, a simple dresser, a washstand, clean and spare like the rest of the house. Caleb laid his son on the bed and unwrapped him carefully, checking for any signs of distress. But the baby slept on, his breathing steady and strong. There are extra blankets in the dresser, Elena said from the doorway, and water in the pitcher if you need to wash. I will wake you when he needs to feed again. You do not have to do that. I can. Mr. Turner, Elena's voice was gentle but firm. I have been waking every 3 hours for 2 months, because my body thinks I still have a baby to feed. It is not a hardship. It is just what happens. Caleb heard the pain beneath her words. The cruel trick of biology that kept her body performing its maternal functions even after her child was gone. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease that pain. But what comfort could he offer? His own grief was too raw, too new. Thank you, he said instead, for everything. Elena nodded and withdrew, closing the door softly behind her. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, watching his son sleep. The baby's tiny fists were curled near his face, his mouth making small sucking motions even in sleep. Dreaming of milk, perhaps. Dreaming of comfort and warmth, and all the things he had been denied for 3 terrible days. The wind rattled the windows. Snow hissed against the glass. But inside this small room, warmth prevailed. Safety prevailed. Life prevailed. For the first time since Mary died, Caleb allowed himself to hope that his son might actually survive, that the morning would come, and his child would still be breathing, that there might be a future beyond this endless night of desperation. He lay down next to the baby, not bothering to undress, his hand resting lightly on the small chest so he could feel each breath, up and down, in and out, the rhythm of life itself. Somewhere in the house he heard Elena moving around, water running, the creak of floorboards, the sounds of another person dealing with grief in the deep hours of night when sleep would not come. Two strangers, Caleb thought, two people shattered by loss, and one tiny baby who had somehow brought them together on the worst night of winter. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a baby slept, his belly full, his small body finally at peace, and two broken hearts found themselves beating in the same rhythm, bound together by the fragile thread of hope. Dawn came late and gray, filtered through clouds that still hung low over Grafton. Caleb woke to the sound of his son crying, a strong, healthy cry that filled him with relief so profound it bordered on pain. The baby was alive, not just breathing, but demanding attention with the vigor of an infant who expected his needs to be met. Caleb picked him up, marveling at how different the child felt compared to last night. There was strength in those small limbs now, tension in the body instead of that terrible limpness. The baby's face had color, his eyes bright with hunger and indignation. A soft knock came at the door. "Mr. Turner, may I come in?" "Yes." Elena entered, already dressed for the day in a simple gray dress. Her hair neatly pinned. She looked tired, exhausted really, but there was something different about her face, a softness that had not been there last night. "He is hungry," Caleb said unnecessarily. "I can hear that." Elena approached and held out her arms. "May I?" Caleb handed over the baby, watching as Elena settled into the room's single chair and began the process of feeding. He turned away again, offering privacy, but Elena's voice stopped him. "You do not have to keep doing that. Turning away, I mean." Her tone was matter-of-fact. "This is how babies eat. It is natural. You are going to see it dozens of times in the coming weeks if we are going to keep him healthy." She was right, of course, but years of propriety were hard to shake even in desperate circumstances. Caleb compromised by sitting on the edge of the bed, his gaze fixed on the window rather than on Elena. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some. Not much." She paused. "Did you know you talk in your sleep?" Caleb felt heat rise to his face. "I did not." "What did I say?" "Mary. You kept apologizing to someone named Mary." Elena's voice was gentle. "Your wife." "Yes." The word came out rough. "I keep thinking if I had done something different, gotten the doctor faster, been more insistent about." He stopped, unable to continue. "She died in childbirth. The baby was breech. Took 12 hours. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done differently, but I cannot help thinking that you failed her." Elena finished the thought. "I know. I think the same thing about my son, that I must have missed something, some sign that he was sick, some way I could have saved him." They sat in silence for a moment, two people who understood that particular flavor of guilt, the kind that comes from surviving when someone you love did not. "My husband blamed me," Elena continued quietly. "Said I must have rolled onto the baby in my sleep. Never mind that I hardly slept at all those first weeks, that I checked on him constantly. He needed someone to blame, and I was there. Where is he now?" "Your husband. Denver, last I heard. Left 2 days after we buried our son. Took everything of value except this house. It was in my family, so he could not sell it. Sent divorce papers a month later." She said it without emotion, as if recounting facts about strangers. The town thinks I drove him away with my grief, that I was too broken to be a proper wife. The town seems to think a lot of cruel things. They do. The baby made a small sound and Elena adjusted his position. You will learn that quickly if you stay here. Grafton is not kind to people who do not fit their idea of normal. Caleb thought about the laughter yesterday, the closed doors, the woman who had spit at his feet. I am already learning. Then you should also know that if word spreads about you staying here last night, people will assume the worst about both of us. Let them assume. Caleb's voice came out harder than he intended. I do not care what they think. My son was dying. You saved him. Nothing else matters. Elena looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition that they had both moved beyond caring about social niceties and into a territory where only survival mattered. He is finished, she said, lifting the baby to her shoulder and patting his back gently. A small burp emerged, making them both smile slightly. He is a good eater, strong, like his mother. Caleb's throat tightened. Mary was the strongest person I knew. She worked the ranch right up until the day before he was born. Never complained, never asked for help she did not need. She sounds remarkable. She was. Caleb stood, needing to move, to do something with the grief that threatened to overwhelm him. I should get back to the boarding house, collect my things. I've not been there since yesterday morning. Mrs. Carmichael is probably wondering where I am. Mrs. Carmichael already knows where you are. Elena's voice was dry. Betty Carmichael knows everything that happens in this town within 6 hours of it happening. She probably knew you were here before you finished knocking on my door last night. Caleb winced. Then the whole town knows by now. Most likely. Elena stood and handed the baby back to him. Which is why you need to decide what you're going to do. This baby needs to eat every 3 to 4 hours. If you take him back to the boarding house, you will be making this walk multiple times a day in whatever weather comes. And Mrs. Carmichael will not allow me to visit you there. Not unmarried as I am, it would not be proper. But me staying here would be... no. But at least the baby would be warm and fed. You have to decide which matters more, your reputation or your son's survival. It was not really a choice at all. Caleb looked down at his son, who was already starting to doze off. Milk, drunk, and content. 3 days ago, this child had been hovering at death's door. Now he was thriving because of Elena. I will stay, Caleb said, if you will have us. Elena's expression was unreadable. I have conditions. Name them. You contribute to the household. I am not running a charity. You can chop wood, tend the chickens, help with repairs. I know you have a ranch outside town. You can work there during the day, but you stay here at night so the baby has consistent access to feeding. Agreed. Second condition. We keep this strictly practical. You need help with your son. I can provide it. But people are going to make assumptions, and I will not have my reputation damaged more than it already is by any actual impropriety. Caleb felt his face flush again. I would never. I am not saying you would. I am saying we need to be clear about boundaries. Separate rooms, separate lives that just happen to overlap for the sake of a baby. Of course. Caleb paused. Is there a third condition? Elena hesitated. And for the first time he saw vulnerability in her expression. When this is over, when he is old enough to eat solid food and does not need me anymore, you take him and go. No arguments, no lingering. I cannot. She stopped, gathering herself. I cannot let myself pretend he is mine. I cannot do that to myself. So when the time comes, you have to be willing to leave. Caleb heard the pain beneath her words. She was already protecting herself against the inevitable attachment, already bracing for another loss. He wanted to tell her it would not be like that she would not have to lose another child, but he could not make promises about the future when the present was uncertain enough. Agreed, he said quietly. Elena nodded. brisk and businesslike again. "Then it is settled. You should go collect your things from Mrs. Carmichael's. I will watch the baby while you are gone." Caleb wrapped his son carefully in blankets and laid him in Elena's arms. Their hands touched briefly during the transfer, and he felt calluses on her palms, working hands, capable hands, hands that had held her own baby and now held his. "I will be back within the hour," he promised. "Take your time. We will be fine." The morning air hit Caleb like a slap when he stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine, unmarked except for the path Caleb now broke as he walked toward town. It was beautiful in the way that only winter mornings could be, and Caleb felt a stab of grief that Mary would never see it, would never see their son grow, would never know that the baby had survived his first terrible days. He was halfway to the boarding house when Dutch Matthews stepped into his path. "Well, well," Dutch's smile was unpleasant. "Look who finally decided to show his face. Heard you spent the night at the Moore woman's house." Caleb kept walking. "Get out of my way. That is mighty ungrateful, Turner. I am just concerned about your well-being. And your son's. Cannot be healthy exposing an infant to a woman like that." Caleb stopped. "A woman like what?" "You know what they say about her," Dutch's voice carried. And Caleb realized they had drawn an audience. Several men had stopped to watch. A woman across the street pretended to examine her shopping while clearly listening. Husband left her. Baby died under suspicious circumstances. Some folks think. Caleb's fist connected with Dutch's jaw before he had consciously decided to throw the punch. Dutch went down hard, landing on his back in the snow. Blood bloomed from his split lip, bright red against white. "Finish that sentence," Caleb said quietly. "I dare you." Dutch scrambled backward, his hand going to his mouth. "You are crazy. You assaulted me. You implied that woman killed her own baby. That is not just cruel. It is a lie." Caleb's voice shook with fury. "Elena Moore lost her child the same way my wife and I almost lost ours, through no fault of her own. And she opened her door to a stranger in the middle of the night and saved my son's life when the rest of this town turned their backs. So yes, I stayed at her house, and I will keep staying there as long as my boy needs her help. Anyone who has a problem with that can say it to my face." He looked around at the gathered crowd, meeting each person's eyes in turn. Some looked away, ashamed. Others stared back with judgment written plain on their faces. Caleb did not care. Let them judge. Let them talk. His son was alive. And that was all that mattered. He stepped over Dutch and continued toward the boarding house, his knuckles throbbing. Mrs. Carmichael was waiting in the front parlor when Caleb arrived. Her expression somewhere between concern and disapproval. She was a stout woman in her 50s, a widow herself who had run the boarding house for nearly 20 years. "Mr. Turner." Her voice was carefully neutral. "I heard about your son. I am glad he is improving. Thank you." Caleb headed for the stairs. "I also heard where you spent the night." He stopped, turned back. "I am sure you did." "I do not judge you for it," Mrs. Carmichael said, surprising him. "A man does what he must to save his child. But you should know that several of my boarders have expressed concerns about having a man with your situation in the house. My situation. An unwed father with a newborn. Living arrangements that seem irregular." She sighed. "What I am saying, Mr. Turner, is that I cannot keep your room for you if you're not staying here. I have a waiting list." So it had come to this already. Not even a full day, and he was being pushed out. Caleb felt anger rise in his chest, but he tamped it down. Mrs. Carmichael was not being cruel. She was being practical. She had a business to run. "I understand," he said. "I will collect my things now. I am sorry." And she did sound sorry. "For what it is worth, I think Mary would be proud of you. Doing whatever it takes to keep her baby alive." The words hit harder than Caleb expected. He had to look away, blinking against sudden moisture in his eyes. "Thank you for that." His room was on the second floor, small and spare. He had only been staying here for a week, since Mary had gotten too pregnant to make the trip from their ranch into town comfortably. They had planned to stay until the baby was born, then return home as a family. Instead, Caleb was packing alone, preparing to move into a stranger's house, because his wife was dead and his son needed milk to survive. He gathered his few possessions quickly: a spare set of clothes, his shaving kit, the leather satchel Mary had given him on their wedding day, a photograph of the two of them taken in Denver on their honeymoon, the only photograph he owned. He wrapped it carefully in a shirt before tucking it into the satchel. The last thing he packed was Mary's Bible. She had been reading from it the night before she went into labor, marking passages she wanted to share with their child when he was older. Caleb opened it now, seeing her handwriting in the margins, notes and prayers and little observations about life. One passage was marked more heavily than the others, underlined twice. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Mary had believed that, had lived it, and now Caleb had to do the same. Bear the grief, believe his son would survive, hope for a future beyond this pain, endure whatever came. He closed the Bible and packed it away. The walk back to Elena's house seemed longer than the walk away from it. Caleb's satchel was not heavy, but the weight of what he was doing pressed down on him with each step. He was moving in with a woman he had only met last night, a woman whose husband had abandoned her, whose baby had died, whose reputation was already in tatters. They would be living under the same roof, sharing space, sharing the care of his infant son. The town would talk. They would assume things. They would make both their lives harder than they already were. But what choice did he have? His son needed to eat. Elena could feed him. The math was that simple, and that complicated. Elena was in the kitchen when he arrived, peeling potatoes at the table. The baby lay in a basket nearby, awake and alert, making the small, gurgling sounds that newborns make. He looked so different from the dying child Caleb had carried through the storm. So alive. "You are back," Elena said without looking up from her work. "I am." Mrs. Carmichael gave up my room. Caleb set down his satchel. "So, I am officially homeless, except for here in the ranch." "The ranch is how far?" 6 miles north. Small operation. 50 head of cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden that Mary tended. There is a cabin, barn. Well, nothing fancy, but it is ours." He paused. "Mine, I mean." Elena's hand stilled on the potato. "You could bring the baby there. I could come out during the day to feed him. 6 miles each way, multiple times a day in this weather." Caleb shook his head. "That is not practical. Besides, the cabin needs work. The roof was leaking before Mary died. I have not had time to fix it, and there is no one else out there if something goes wrong. So you are staying here, if you will still have us. I already told you my conditions. As long as you abide by them, you are welcome to stay." Caleb moved closer to the basket, looking down at his son. The baby's eyes tracked movement now, following sounds, growing stronger by the hour. "I should give him a name. It feels wrong to keep calling him the baby. What would Mary have wanted?" Caleb thought about that. They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but never settled on anything definite. Mary had favored family names. Her grandfather's name was Thomas. Caleb's father was James. But Caleb found himself thinking of something else entirely. "Samuel," he said softly. "It means heard by heaven." Mary used to say that about our prayers, that they were heard even when the answers were not what we wanted. Elena looked up from her work. "Samuel Turner. It is a good name. Strong. Samuel James Turner." Caleb reached down and touched his son's tiny hand. "After my father." The baby Samuel wrapped his fingers around Caleb's thumb with surprising strength. Such a small gesture, but it felt like a promise, like a commitment to survival. "He is going to need more clothes." Elena observed. And diapers. What you have will not be enough if you are staying here long term. I have some things at the ranch. I can ride out there tomorrow. Bring back what we need. Make a list of everything. Do not forget blankets. It is going to stay cold for months yet. Elena returned to her potatoes. There is paper and pencil in the desk by the window. They fell into an awkward rhythm then, working in parallel. Elena preparing food. Caleb making lists, trying to anticipate what a baby would need for the coming weeks. The silence between them was not comfortable exactly, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people learning to occupy the same space, feeling out boundaries, figuring out how to coexist. Around midday, Samuel started to fuss. Elena wiped her hands and picked him up, settling into the rocking chair by the stove. Caleb tried not to watch, but found his gaze drawn anyway. There was something about the picture they made, woman and child, the ancient ritual of feeding. That stirred complicated emotions in his chest. Grief because Mary should have been the one doing this. Gratitude because Elena was keeping his son alive. And something else. Something he could not quite name. A sense of rightness that felt wrong to acknowledge. "Tell me about your ranch," Elena said, breaking the silence. "What made you choose Colorado?" Caleb was grateful for the distraction. Cheap land, open space. "Mary and I came from Ohio originally. Her family ran a dry goods store. Mine worked in a mill. We wanted something different, wanted to build something of our own. That must have been hard, starting from nothing." "It was. First winter nearly killed us. We lost half our cattle to the cold. Did not have money to replace them. Mary got sick. Pneumonia. I thought I would lose her." He paused, remembering those desperate weeks. But she pulled through. She always pulled through, until she did not. "My husband and I came from Illinois," Elena offered. He had this idea that he could strike it rich in the silver mines. Spent 2 years breaking his back underground before admitting it was not going to happen. We moved to Grafton so he could work for the railroad. He hated it, hated this town, hated being ordinary. Is that why he left? After the baby died? Partly. But mostly he left because I reminded him of failure. Our son dying felt like one more thing he could not fix, could not control. Easier to blame me and start over somewhere else. Caleb heard the bitterness in her voice. Carefully controlled but present nonetheless. "His loss," he said. "Any man who would abandon his wife after losing a child is not worth mourning." Elena's eyes met his, surprised. "That is kind of you to say." "It is not kind. It is true." They looked at each other for a long moment, two people who understood loss in ways they had never wanted to. Then Samuel made a small sound and Elena looked away, returning her attention to the baby. The afternoon passed slowly. Caleb made himself useful, chopping wood for the stove, checking the roof for damage from last night's storm, fixing a loose board on the front steps. Physical work felt good after days of helpless worry. It gave him something to do with his hands, his energy, his need to feel productive. Elena watched him from the window at one point, her expression unreadable. When he came back inside, she had coffee waiting. "You do not have to work so hard," she said. "I told you to contribute, but I did not mean you had to rebuild my entire house in one day. Keeps me busy, keeps me from thinking too much." Caleb wrapped his hands around the warm cup. "Besides, you are feeding my son. Chopping some wood is the least I can do. I am not feeding him for you. I am feeding him for him." Elena's voice was firm. "Do not make this transactional. It is not." "Then what is it?" She was quiet for a moment. "Survival. For all three of us. You need help keeping your son alive. I need a reason to get up in the morning. Samuel needs milk. Those three things happened to intersect at the right moment." It was a clinical way to describe what was happening. But Caleb understood why she framed it that way. Distance. Protection. If she kept it practical and unemotional, maybe it would not hurt so much when it ended. But even as she said it, her hand moved to rest gently on Samuel's back as he slept in her arms. The gesture was unconscious, tender. Whatever she told herself about keeping distance, her body had already claimed this child in some fundamental way. And Caleb found himself hoping that when the time came to leave, she would not be able to let them go. The marriage certificate changed nothing about their daily routine, but it changed everything about how Grafton treated them. 3 weeks had passed since that first night. 3 weeks of Samuel growing stronger, of Caleb and Elena learning to navigate their strange arrangement, of the town watching and whispering. The hostile stares had softened slightly after the wedding. Women still crossed the street, but now they nodded curtly instead of looking away entirely. Dutch Matthews kept his distance, though his eyes still followed Caleb with barely concealed contempt whenever their paths crossed. Respectability, Caleb learned, was a thin veneer, easily applied by a piece of paper, and just as easily stripped away by circumstance. But they had not gotten married willingly. The town council had forced their hand. It happened 2 weeks after Caleb moved into Elena's house. Sheriff Bennett had arrived late at night, his expression grim. "Town council met tonight," Bennett said. "There have been complaints about your living situation. They have issued an order. Either you marry Mrs. Moore within the week, or you move out and find other arrangements for the baby." Caleb had felt ice in his veins. "They cannot do that. They just did." "I'm sorry, Turner. I tried to argue against it, but Dutch Matthews and his friends pushed it through. They are calling it a moral hazard." Bennett looked genuinely apologetic. "You have 7 days. Elena had heard everything through the thin walls. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "They have backed us into a corner," she said quietly. "I will not force you into a marriage you do not want. And I will not let Samuel suffer because we are too proud to do what is necessary. We could fight this, get a lawyer. With what money? And what judge in this territory would rule in favor of an unmarried man and woman living together?" Elena's voice was pragmatic, but Caleb heard the resignation in it. They spent those 7 days in careful discussion, negotiating terms like business partners rather than potential spouses. They would marry legally but maintain the boundaries they had established. Separate bedrooms, no romantic expectations. A partnership focused entirely on Samuel's welfare. When he was weaned and old enough, they could divorce quietly and go their separate ways. It should have felt clinical, emotionless. But Caleb found himself watching Elena during those days, seeing her in ways he had not before. The patience she showed with Samuel, the quiet strength in how she handled the town's judgment, the way she sang softly while rocking the baby to sleep, her voice carrying a melody that made his chest ache. On the 6th day, Caleb rode to the ranch and stood at Mary's grave. He had buried her in a small plot behind the cabin, under a cottonwood tree she had loved. The ground was frozen now, snow covering the fresh earth. "I do not know what to do," he told her, speaking to cold stone. "The town is forcing my hand. And I do not want to dishonor your memory. But Samuel needs stability. He needs Elena. And I think maybe Elena needs us too, even if she will not admit it." The wind answered, rustling through bare branches. Caleb waited, hoping for some sign, some indication of what Mary would want. But the dead did not speak, and he was left to make this choice alone. He thought about their last conversation, hours before she went into labor. She had been excited, nervous, chattering about all the things they would do as a family. And then she had grown serious, taking his hand. "If something happens to me," she had said, "nothing is going to happen. But if it does, promise me you will take care of our baby. Promise me you will do whatever it takes to keep him safe and loved." Caleb had promised, not believing he would ever have to keep that vow. Now, standing at her grave, he understood what she had been asking. Not that he mourned her forever, not that he preserved her memory at the cost of their son's welfare, but that he did whatever it took. Whatever it took to give Samuel the life she had wanted for him, even if that meant marrying someone else. I am sorry, he whispered to the snow-covered ground. But I made you a promise, and I'm going to keep it. On the seventh day, Caleb and Elena stood before Justice of the Peace Williams in his office above the pharmacy. There were no flowers, no guests, no celebration, just two people speaking vows neither fully believed, witnessed by a bored clerk and the justice himself. Do you, Caleb Turner, take Elena Moore to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Elena Moore, take Caleb Turner to be your lawfully wedded husband? Elena's voice was steady. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. No kiss, no congratulations, just signatures on a document that changed everything and nothing. They walked home in silence, now legally married but feeling no different than they had that morning. The only difference was the ring Caleb had bought. A simple silver band that Elena wore on her left hand like a shield against judgment. That night they ate supper as they always did, Samuel sleeping between feeds. The only acknowledgement of what had happened came as they were cleaning up. Thank you, Elena said quietly, for doing this. I know it was not easy. You are the one who is sacrificing, Caleb replied. You are tied to a man you barely know. All to stop gossip. We are both sacrificing. But at least now Samuel is protected. That is what matters. She was right. But as Caleb lay in his separate room that night listening to his wife moving in her own space, he felt the strange weight of what they had done. They had married to satisfy others, to protect a child, to survive in a world that punished unconventional arrangements. But somewhere in the practical negotiations and legal paperwork, something had shifted. They were partners now, bound by law and necessity. And Caleb could not shake the feeling that they had crossed a line they could never uncross, even if they tried. Now, weeks later, that feeling had only grown stronger. Elena had started keeping a journal, writing in it each evening after Samuel was asleep, recording milestones and observations. Caleb had glimpsed the entries once when she had left it open on the table. Today, Samuel laughed for the first time. A real laugh, not just gas or reflex. Caleb was making faces at him, and Samuel thought it was the funniest thing in the world. The sound filled the whole house. I have not heard laughter in this house since before my son died. I had forgotten what it sounded like. The words had struck Caleb deeply, revealing how much Elena had invested in Samuel despite her insistence on maintaining distance. She was protecting herself against inevitable loss, yes. But she was also falling in love with the baby she had saved, and that complicated everything. One evening, Elena received a letter from her sister in Illinois. Caleb found her in the kitchen. The letter crumpled in her fist, her face pale and tight with anger. "What is wrong?" he asked. Elena smoothed the letter out on the table, her hands shaking slightly. "My sister heard about the marriage. Somehow word reached Illinois." She laughed bitterly. "She is concerned about my well-being, thinks I have been taken advantage of by a desperate widower, suggests I come stay with her until I can think clearly about my situation." Caleb read over her shoulder, seeing the barely concealed judgment in every line. The sister Catherine wrote in the careful language of someone trying to sound supportive while actually being deeply critical. She questioned whether Elena was truly ready for another marriage so soon after her loss. Wondered if Caleb was the kind of man who values you for yourself or merely for the service you can provide. "I am sorry," Caleb said. "She does not understand the situation. She does not want to understand. She wants to believe I am being used because that fits the narrative she has always had about me. Poor Elena making bad choices. Poor Elena married to a man who abandoned her. Poor Elena so desperate for purpose that she would trap herself with a widower and his baby." Elena crumpled the letter again. "She does not know that I chose this, that I am choosing it every day. You could write back. Explain. What would I say? That we married to avoid scandal. That we sleep in separate rooms and live separate lives. That this whole thing is a practical arrangement that will end the moment Samuel does not need me anymore." Elena's voice cracked slightly. She would use that as proof that I am being used. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Are you being used? Elena met his eyes directly. Are you using me? No. I am grateful for your help, but I never wanted to trap you into anything. You could leave tomorrow if you wanted. I would figure something out. And you think I do not know that? Elena's expression softened slightly. That is the difference between you and my former husband. He needed me to need him, to be helpless so he could feel important. You would let me walk away even if it made your life harder. That is not using someone. That is respecting them. The words hung between them, intimate in a way their relationship had carefully avoided. Caleb found himself noticing small details he had been trying not to see. The way lamplight caught in Elena's dark hair, the strength in her hands as they gripped the edge of the table, the intelligence in her eyes that the town had tried so hard to diminish. Do not respond to your sister, he said finally. At least not now. Let her believe what she wants. People who have decided to judge you will not be swayed by explanations. Elena nodded slowly. You are right. I just wish. She stopped, shaking her head. Never mind what I wish. Wishes are for children. But Caleb heard the longing beneath her pragmatism, the wish to be understood, to be seen as something other than pitiable or scandalous. He understood that wish intimately, because he carried the same one. Sheriff Bennett found Caleb in town one morning a few weeks later, his expression thoughtful rather than concerned for once. There is going to be a dance next month, Bennett said. Spring celebration. Town throws it every year. You should bring Elena. Caleb nearly laughed. She will not want to go. Maybe not. But maybe she needs to be asked. Needs to know she is still part of this community, even if part of the community acts like fools. Bennett clapped him on the shoulder. Think about it. Caleb did think about it. All the way home. The idea of taking Elena to a public dance seemed absurd. They barely spoke beyond practical matters about Samuel, barely acknowledged the marriage that bound them legally. How could they present themselves as a couple to the town when they were not truly a couple at all? But that evening, watching Elena rock Samuel to sleep, her voice soft with a lullaby, Caleb was beginning to recognize he found himself speaking before he could reconsider. There is a dance next month, a spring celebration. Sheriff thinks we should attend. Elena's hand stilled on the rocking chair. Why would we do that? To show the town we are not ashamed, to stop hiding like we have done something wrong. Have we not? Married under duress, living a lie. We are not living a lie. We are legally married. We share a household and care for a child together. That is more real than half the marriages in this town, whatever our sleeping arrangements. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Samuel's sleeping face. I do not dance anymore. Have not since before my son was born. Neither have I. Not since Mary died. Caleb moved closer, drawn by something he could not name. But maybe that is exactly why we should go. Show ourselves that we are still alive, still capable of existing in the world. Or we could just stay here where it is safe. Is it, though? Safe. Caleb gestured toward the walls beyond which Grafton judged and whispered. Every time you go to town, people stare. Every time I am at the market, someone has a comment. We can hide here and let them think we are ashamed, or we can face them directly. Elena looked up at him then, her expression complex. You want to fight. You have always wanted to fight them. No, I want to stop caring what they think. There is a difference. She considered this, then nodded slowly. All right. We will go to the dance. But if anyone says one cruel word about my dead son or your dead wife, I am leaving. I will not stay and smile through that. Fair enough. The next 4 weeks passed in a strange limbo of preparation and dread. Elena dug out a dress she had not worn in over a year, a simple blue cotton that had fit before pregnancy. Now it hung slightly loose, testament to the weight she had lost in grief. She altered it at the kitchen table, her needle flashing in lamplight while Samuel slept nearby. Caleb watched her work, struck by the domesticity of it. This was what married life looked like from the outside. A woman sewing, a baby sleeping, a man reading the newspaper by the fire. Normal, ordinary. Except nothing about their situation was ordinary, and the performance they were preparing for felt increasingly surreal. "What was your wedding like?" Elena asked one evening, breaking the comfortable silence. "With Mary." Caleb set down his paper, surprised by the question. They rarely spoke about their previous spouses, as if mentioning them would somehow violate the boundaries they had established. "Small," he said finally. "Just us. A justice of the peace. And two strangers we pulled off the street to witness. We could not afford anything fancy. But you loved her, more than anything." Elena's hand stilled on her sewing. "That must make this harder. Being married to someone you do not love." "I do not love you," Caleb said. Then stopped, realizing how that sounded. "I mean, I care about you. I am grateful for everything you have done. That is not nothing. But it is not love. No." The admission felt like a betrayal, though he did not know who he was betraying. "Is that what you want?" "Love," Elena laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "I do not know what I want anymore. Some days I think I just want to feel something other than this constant ache. Other days I think the ache is all I have left of my son, and losing it would mean losing him completely." Caleb understood that paradox intimately. Grief was pain, yes, but it was also connection. To let go of the pain felt like letting go of the person who caused it. He carried Mary's absence like a wound that would not heal, and part of him did not want it to heal, because then she would truly be gone. "We are a pair," he said quietly. "Both of us more comfortable with our dead than our living, except for Samuel." Elena's expression softened as she looked at the sleeping baby. "He is completely alive, completely present. No ghosts, no grief, just hunger and growth and trust that his needs will be met. You have given him that. The trust. We have given him that. You are his father. That matters." But Caleb had noticed how Samuel responded to Elena versus himself. The baby would calm instantly in her arms, would root toward her when hungry, would track her movements across a room. With Caleb, Samuel was comfortable but not preferential. He was learning his father's voice and face. But it was Elena's he sought for comfort. It should have bothered Caleb more than it did. Instead, he found himself grateful that his son had someone who could provide that maternal presence, even if it was temporary, even if it could not last. The night of the dance arrived cold and clear. The town hall was decorated with lanterns, their warm light casting shadows over tables laden with food. A small group of musicians occupied one corner, tuning their instruments. Caleb and Elena arrived late, hoping to slip in unnoticed. Instead, conversation died as they entered, every head turning to stare. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Margaret Flynn crossed the room and took Elena's hands. "Mrs. Turner, I am so glad you came. And do you not look lovely in that dress?" The moment broke. Conversation resumed, though at a lower volume. They found seats near the refreshment table, neither quite brave enough to venture onto the dance floor. Caleb watched other couples moving through the patterns of a simple waltz, remembering the last time he had danced. It had been with Mary at a harvest celebration 2 years ago. She had been laughing, her face flushed with exertion and joy, completely alive and present, and his. "You are thinking about her," Elena said quietly. "Am I that obvious?" Only to someone who is thinking about the same thing. Different person, same absence. They sat in shared understanding, two widowed hearts pretending to be whole. "We should dance," Caleb said suddenly. Just once. Show them we can. Elena looked at him like he had suggested they burn the building down. I do not think. One dance, then we can leave. He stood and offered his hand. Please. For a moment he thought she would refuse. Then she placed her hand in his and let him lead her to the floor. The musicians started a new song, something slow and simple. Caleb put his hand at Elena's waist, feeling her stiffen at the contact. They began to move, awkward and uncertain. Two people who had shared a house for weeks but had never been this close. Everyone is watching, Elena murmured. Let them watch. They turned slowly, finding the rhythm. Elena's hand in his was warm, calloused from work. She smelled faintly of the lavender soap she used, and Caleb realized with a start that this was the closest he had been to another person since Mary died. The intimacy of it was both comforting and deeply uncomfortable. This was a mistake, Elena said. We should go. One more minute. We are already here. But before the minute could pass, Dutch Matthews appeared at the edge of the floor, his voice carrying over the music. Well, ain't this sweet? The grieving widow and widower playing house. Tell me, Turner, does she cry for her dead baby when you are? Caleb's fist connected with Dutch's jaw before he could finish. This time he put his full weight behind it. Dutch went down hard, blood spraying from his nose. The music stopped. Women gasped. Men surged forward. Do not you ever, Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. Speak about her son. Do not you mention him. Do not you think about him. Do not you use his death as ammunition for your petty hate. Are we clear? Dutch scrambled backward, his hand to his bleeding nose. You are crazy. All of you saw he attacked me. Sheriff Bennett pushed through the crowd, his expression grim. I saw Dutch Matthews insult a lady and get exactly what he deserved. Anyone else see different? Silence. Then Margaret Flynn spoke up. I saw Mr. Matthews harass Mrs. Turner. I heard what he said about her deceased child. If anyone should be removed from this dance, it is him. A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the crowd. Not everyone. Plenty of faces still held judgment and disapproval. But enough people nodded that Bennett felt comfortable hauling Dutch to his feet. You are done here, Matthews. Go home and cool off. Dutch left with a final venomous glare. The musicians started playing again. Conversation slowly resuming. But Caleb felt Elena trembling beside him, saw tears streaming down her face. Not from Dutch's words, he realized, but from the defense Margaret and others had offered, the unexpected solidarity. I need air, Elena whispered. They left the hall together, stepping into the cool spring night. Elena walked quickly, not stopping until they had reached the edge of town, where her house stood dark and quiet. Only then did she turn to face him, her expression raw. You should not have hit him. He deserved it, maybe. But now you have made an enemy. A real one. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. You cannot keep fighting my battles. Eventually I have to learn to fight them myself. Or we fight them together. We are married, remember? What hurts you hurts Samuel, and what hurts Samuel hurts me. That makes your battles mine whether you like it or not. Elena stared at him, something shifting in her expression. When did this become real to you? This marriage, I do not know. Somewhere between the legal ceremony and tonight, I guess. It started as convenience, but maybe it is becoming something else. Something neither of us planned. I cannot, Elena said, her voice breaking. I cannot let this be real, because real things can be lost, and I have lost too much already. I cannot survive losing anything else. You will not lose Samuel, I promise. You cannot promise that. You do not control the future any more than I do. Elena's composure shattered completely. My son was healthy one day and dead the next. Mary was alive in the morning and gone by evening. We do not get to keep the things we love, Caleb. Life takes them away. She was crying fully now. All all the grief she had held back for months pouring out. Caleb moved without thinking, pulling her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, her whole body shaking with sobs. He held her while she wept, for her dead son, her failed marriage, the cruel town, the impossibly hard life she had been handed. And somewhere in holding her, Caleb felt his own walls cracking. He had been so focused on Samuel's survival that he had forgotten to acknowledge his own grief, forgotten to mourn Mary properly, forgotten to feel anything except the desperate need to keep moving forward. But Elena's tears unleashed his own, and they stood together in the darkness, two people finally allowing themselves to break. Eventually the storm passed, leaving them both exhausted and quiet. Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I am sorry," she said. "Do not be. I needed that too." They walked home in silence, but it was different than before. Less careful, less guarded. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable, and somehow that had created a new foundation for whatever they were building. The days that followed brought subtle changes. Elena did not move into Caleb's room, but she stopped treating the marriage as purely transactional. They began eating meals together with intentionality rather than convenience. They talked about more than just Samuel's needs, about their pasts, their fears, their tentative hopes for the future. Small touches became more frequent. Hands brushing as they passed items, shoulders touching as they sat together. The casual intimacy of two people learning to be comfortable in each other's space. Spring arrived in earnest, transforming Grafton from a frozen wasteland into something green and possible. Wild flowers pushed through the last patches of snow. The river that ran through town swelled with snowmelt, its voice a constant rushing backdrop to daily life. And Samuel, now 3 months old, began to change in ways that marked the passage from newborn to infant. He smiled now. Real smiles that lit up his entire face when Elena or Caleb came into view. He tracked movement with focused attention, following sounds with his eyes. His hands had discovered each other, and he spent long minutes studying his own fingers as if they were the most fascinating things in existence. He was growing stronger, filling out, becoming unmistakably himself rather than just a generic baby fighting for survival. One afternoon, Caleb found Elena in the garden, planting seedlings with intense concentration. Samuel lay in a basket nearby, protected from the sun by a makeshift canopy. "You did not have to do that," Caleb said, dismounting from his horse. "The garden is my responsibility. I needed the air and the work." Elena sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Besides, this garden was Mary's. It seems wrong to let it go untended." Caleb knelt beside her, examining the neat rows of tomato plants. She would appreciate that. She loved growing things, said it was proof that life continues even when everything feels dead. "She sounds like she was wise." She was, about most things. Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. "She would like you, I think. You are both stronger than you believe yourselves to be." Elena's hands stilled in the soil. "Do not do that. Do not make her approve of me from beyond the grave. I am not asking for her blessing. I am not offering it on her behalf. I am just saying I think you would have liked each other. Two women who understood what it meant to survive hard things. I am not trying to replace her, I know. But you're not trying to disappear either, and that is what you have been doing for the past 4 months, treating yourself as temporary, as if you are just passing through our lives and will disappear the moment Samuel does not need you anymore." Elena resumed planting, her movements sharp and precise. "That was the agreement. When he is weaned, I step back. Agreements can change. People can change." Caleb reached out and stilled her hands with his own, forcing her to look at him. "I do not want you to step back, Elena. I want you to stay. Permanently. As my actual wife. Not just legally. You do not know what you are asking. I know exactly what I am asking. I am asking you to take a risk on something real. to stop protecting yourself against loss and start living toward something better. Elena pulled her hands free, standing abruptly. Samuel stirred in his basket, and she picked him up automatically, holding him against her shoulder. And what happens when it falls apart? When you realize I am not who you thought I was, or when the grief catches up with both of us and we cannot stand to look at each other anymore. Then we deal with it together, like we have been dealing with everything else. You make it sound simple. It is not simple. Elena's voice rose slightly and Samuel whimpered. She lowered it immediately, rocking him gently. I watched my husband walk away because he could not handle my grief. I buried my own child and had to do it alone because everyone in this town decided I was responsible. I have spent months being called a harlot and a home wrecker for the crime of keeping your son alive. And now you want me to open myself up to more pain by pretending this could be a real marriage. It already is a real marriage. The only thing pretend about it is the wall you have built between us. Caleb stood, facing her directly. I am not your former husband. I will not leave when things get hard, because things are already hard and I am still here. And yes, maybe we are both still grieving. Maybe we will always be grieving to some extent, but we can grieve together or we can grieve alone. I know which one I prefer. Elena was crying now, tears streaming silently down her face. I am scared. I'm so tired of being scared. Caleb closed the distance between them, wrapping his arms around both Elena and Samuel. She resisted for a moment, then leaned into him, her head against his shoulder, the baby pressed between them. They stood that way for a long time, 3 people holding each other up against the weight of all they had lost and all they stood to lose. I cannot promise it will not hurt, Caleb said quietly, but I can promise you will not face it alone. Elena nodded against his shoulder. And Caleb felt something fundamental shift between them. Not a resolution exactly, but an opening, a willingness to consider possibilities that had seemed impossible just moments before. That night, after Samuel was fed and sleeping, Elena appeared at Caleb's bedroom door. She stood in the threshold, her expression uncertain but determined. I have been thinking about what you said, about this being real. She paused, gathering courage. I do not know if I can love you the way you loved Mary. I do not know if I am capable of that kind of love anymore, but I can try, if you are willing to be patient with me. Caleb crossed the room and took her hands. I do not need you to love me like Mary did. I need you to love me like Elena does. Whatever that looks like, I do not know what that looks like yet. Then we will figure it out together. Elena's smile was tentative, but genuine. You are annoyingly optimistic for someone who has buried a wife. And you are annoyingly practical for someone who just agreed to take a chance on love. I did not say love. I said try. It is a start. They stood close but not touching, the space between them charged with possibility. Then Elena stepped back, her cheeks slightly flushed. I should sleep. Samuel will be up in a few hours. Elena. Caleb waited until she turned back. Thank you for being willing to try. She nodded and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Caleb alone with a feeling he had not experienced in months. Hope. The changes came gradually after that night. Elena did not move into Caleb's room right away, but she stopped treating the marriage as purely transactional. They began eating meals together with intentionality rather than convenience. They talked about more than just Samuel's needs, about their pasts, their fears, their tentative hopes for the future. Small touches became more frequent, hands brushing as they passed items, shoulders touching as they sat together, the casual intimacy of 2 people learning to be comfortable in each other's space. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with Samuel playing at their feet, Elena spoke quietly. I am happy. I did not think I would ever be able to say that again. But I am. Caleb pulled her close. So am I. It feels disloyal somehow, to be happy when Mary and Daniel are not here to share it. Or maybe it is the greatest tribute we can give them, living fully, loving completely, building something good from the wreckage they left behind. Caleb kissed the top of her head. I think they would both want that for us. Elena was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I think so too. In July, Caleb made a decision. He sold the ranch. Elena was shocked when he told her. But that land was yours and Mary's dream. You cannot just give it up. I am not giving it up. I am choosing something different. Caleb spread the sale papers on the table. The ranch is 6 miles from town. If we live there, Samuel grows up isolated, and you are cut off from what little community you have built here. If we stay in town, I am constantly riding back and forth, never fully present either place. So you are selling? I am selling the land, but keeping the cattle. There is a property on the edge of town, 5 acres with a good house and a barn, close enough that you can walk to the market. Far enough that we have space. We can run a smaller operation. Keep chickens and a few head of cattle. Grow vegetables. It will not be the ranch Mary and I dreamed of, but it will be ours. All 3 of ours. Elena stared at the papers, her expression unreadable. You would do that. Give up your dream for me and Samuel. It is not giving up. Not giving. It is choosing better. Mary and I wanted the ranch because we wanted to build something together. Well, I am still building something together. Just with you instead. He took her hand. Unless you would prefer the ranch, we can make that work too. No. I want to stay near town. I want Samuel to have friends, to go to school with other children. I want... She stopped, emotion thick in her voice. I want what you are offering. A home. A real one. They moved in August, transporting their combined belongings to the new property. It had a spacious main house with 3 bedrooms, a well-built barn, and a garden plot that was already producing. Elena walked through the empty rooms with wonder, touching walls and windowsills as if she could not quite believe this was real. We can paint, Caleb said, watching her. Fix it up however you want. It is yours to shape. Ours, she corrected. It is ours. They spent the next weeks making the house a home. Caleb repaired loose boards and painted walls. Elena sewed curtains and made the bedrooms comfortable. They set up a nursery for Samuel, filling it with the crib Caleb had built, the quilts Mary had sewn, and the toys that had belonged to Daniel, the past and present mingling, creating something new. One evening, Elena asked to tell Caleb about Daniel, for the first time since his death. His name was Daniel James Moore, she said quietly. He had dark hair like mine, and blue eyes like his father's, and he made this small huffing sound when he slept, almost like a laugh. I used to lie awake just listening to it, thinking it was the most perfect sound in the world. Tell me more, Caleb said, and she did. For the next hour, while Samuel played with Daniel's rattle, Elena talked about her son. The stories poured out, memories she had been holding locked away because sharing them felt impossible without someone who would truly listen. But Caleb listened, and he asked questions, and he held her when the memories became too painful to continue. When she finally fell silent, exhausted, but lighter somehow, Caleb spoke carefully. You know what I think. I think Daniel would be glad his things are being used, that his mother found a way to keep living, keep loving, keep giving even after losing him. You cannot know that. No. But I know what I would want for Samuel if something happened to him. I would want whoever survived him to find joy again, to use his things to help other children, to remember him with love instead of just pain. Caleb paused. Mary would want the same for us. She would want Samuel raised by 2 people who love him, not by a father drowning in grief. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. When did you become so wise? I am not wise. I am just tired of grief being the only thing that defines us. He pulled Elena closer, and this time she came willingly, fitting against his side as if she belonged there. We have both lost people we loved. Nothing will change that, but we do not have to let loss be the end of our story. They sat together on the floor, Samuel between them, creating a small circle of warmth and possibility. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside, a family was forming. Not the families any of them had planned, but a family nonetheless. September brought Samuel's first birthday. Elena organized a small celebration. Just Margaret Flynn and Sheriff Bennett, and a few other people who had shown kindness during the difficult months. They gathered in the new house, eating cake and watching Samuel destroy his first taste of frosting with enthusiastic glee. "Look at him," Margaret said, smiling. "Hard to believe this is the same baby who was dying in your arms 9 months ago." Caleb looked at his son, healthy, happy, covered in cake, completely unaware of how close he had come to not surviving his first days of life. "It is hard to believe." "You both did well," Sheriff Bennett observed, nodding toward Elena. "Built something good from a bad situation." "We got lucky," Elena said. "Luck had nothing to do with it. You made choices, hard ones, and you stuck with them even when the whole town was against you." Bennett raised his glass. "That takes courage." After the guests left, Caleb and Elena sat together, watching Samuel sleep in his crib, exhausted from his birthday excitement. "A year ago, I was holding Mary's hand while she died," Caleb said quietly. "I thought my life was over, that I would never feel anything but grief again. And now I have you and Samuel and this house, this life. It is not what I planned, but it is good. Maybe better than what I planned." Elena leaned against him. "Is it wrong that I barely think about my former husband anymore? That when I remember Daniel, it does not destroy me like it used to? I do not think it is wrong. I think it means you are healing." "I used to think healing meant forgetting. But it is not that, is it?" "No. It is making room for new memories alongside the old ones. It is choosing to keep living, even though people we love did not get that choice." They sat in the quiet nursery, two people who had found each other in the darkest moment of both their lives, and somehow built a family from that darkness. It was not the family either of them had planned, but it was real. And it was theirs, and it was enough. Winter came again, bringing with it the anniversary of that terrible night when Caleb had collapsed on the church steps with his dying son. He woke early on that anniversary morning, careful not to disturb Elena sleeping beside her. She had finally moved into his bedroom 2 months prior, and went to stand by Samuel's crib. The baby slept soundly, his chest rising and falling in healthy rhythm. 15 months old now, walking, babbling, full of personality and life. A miracle, Caleb thought. Not the religious kind, but the human kind. The miracle of two people refusing to give up, refusing to let death win. He felt Elena's presence before she spoke, her hand sliding into his. Remembering, she asked quietly, "How could I not? A year ago tonight I thought I had lost everything. Instead you found me. Instead we found each other." Caleb turned to face her. "Do you ever regret it? Opening your door that night?" Elena was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I regret how hard it has been. The town's judgment. The pain of loving Samuel knowing I would have to let him go. The fear of opening my heart again after it had been so thoroughly broken." She paused. "But I do not regret opening the door. I do not regret saving him. And I do not regret falling in love with both of you." It was the first time she had said it so directly. "I love you, not qualified, not hedged, just plain truth." "I love you too," Caleb said. "Not the same way I loved Mary, but just as real, just as deep." "I know. And that is enough. It is more than enough." They stood together, watching their son sleep, and Caleb felt the last pieces of his grief settling into something he could carry without being crushed by it. Mary would always be part of him, and Elena would always carry Daniel in her heart. But they had made room for new love, new life, new possibilities. Samuel stirred and opened his eyes, seeing his parents standing over him. His face split into a wide smile, and he reached up, wanting to be held. Elena picked him up, and he immediately reached for Caleb, wanting both of them. They stood there, the three of them, as the sun began to rise over Grafton. "Mama," Samuel said, one of his few words, patting Elena's face. "That is right, sweet boy. Mama is here." "Papa," he added, patting Caleb's shoulder. "Papa is here too. We are both here, always." It was a promise Caleb knew they could not absolutely guarantee. Life was too uncertain, death too unpredictable. But it was a promise they could choose to keep every day they were given. And that choosing, that daily commitment to each other and to Samuel, was what made them a family. On a particularly cold January evening, as snow fell heavy outside their warm house, Elena and Caleb sat together by the fire. Samuel was asleep upstairs, and they had rare quiet time together. "Do you think we should have another?" Elena asked suddenly. Caleb looked at her in surprise. "Another child. It is probably too soon. I am probably being foolish. But Samuel needs siblings. And I think I am ready to try again. To have a baby of my own. With you." Caleb's throat tightened with emotion. This was Elena choosing not just to accept the family they had built, but to expand it. Choosing to risk pregnancy and childbirth again despite losing Daniel. Choosing to trust that this time might be different. "Are you sure? After everything you have been through?" "I am terrified," she admitted. "But I am also hopeful. And I want Samuel to have brothers or sisters. I want to give you a child that is truly ours. Not born of tragedy, but of love. Samuel is ours. Biology does not change that." "I know, but I want this anyway." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "What do you think?" "I think you are the bravest person I have ever met. And if you are ready, then I am ready too." 2 years after that terrible winter night, Caleb stood in the kitchen of their home, watching Elena teach Samuel how to help with breakfast. She was visibly pregnant now. 6 months along with the daughter they would learn about in 3 more months. Samuel was careful with the eggs, his small tongue sticking out in concentration as he helped his mother. This was their life, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Built from loss and grief and the desperate need to survive it, had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted. Love, not the easy love of fairy tales, but the complicated love of real people who had seen the worst life could offer and chosen to keep living anyway, who had found each other in darkness and built toward light, who had taken a dying baby and made him the center of a family that should not have worked, but somehow did. "Papa, look," Samuel called, holding up an egg triumphantly. "I see, buddy. Good job." Elena caught his eye over Samuel's head and smiled, the full, genuine smile she had learned to give again after months of grief. Caleb smiled back, feeling something close to contentment settle in his chest. The town of Grafton had moved on to other scandals, other stories. Dutch Matthews had moved to another town, unable to bear watching their happiness. The Reverend had eventually made his peace with them, even visiting occasionally to check on Samuel's welfare. Margaret Flynn had become a regular visitor, a true friend to Elena. And as snow began to fall again outside, covering the world in fresh white, Caleb thought about beginnings and endings. About how Mary's death had led to Elena's salvation, how Daniel's loss had made room for Samuel's life, about how the worst night of his existence had become the first night of his second chance. Love, he had learned, was not about replacing what you had lost. It was about making room for what you had found. And he had found more than he ever thought possible in this complicated woman, and this thriving child, and the daughter yet to be born. "Come eat," Elena called, pulling him from his thoughts. "Before Samuel decides eggs belong on the floor instead of the plate." Caleb joined his family at the table, Samuel between them. chattering about his eggs and the snow and everything his toddler mind found fascinating. This was home. This was family. This was love. Messy and imperfect and absolutely real. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Outside, winter raged on just as it had 2 years before. But inside, a fire burned warm. A child laughed. A woman hummed softly as she cooked. And a man who had once stood on frozen church steps with a dying baby in his arms found himself exactly where he was meant to be. Not by chance, but by choice. The choice to open a door. The choice to ask for help. The choice to keep living when death seemed easier. The choice to love again. That is the true miracle of this story. Not that a baby survived against all odds, but that two broken people chose to be whole together. They chose each other, every single day, and in the choosing they found something more precious than anything they had lost. A family, built not from blood or duty, but from the simple, desperate, beautiful choice to keep going. Together, always together. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.